Chapter 6. Sven sat in the acrid burned cell and ground a piece of charcoal down into fine dust. He tried not to look at the burned lumps he'd stacked in the furthest corner of his cell. In the back of his mind, he knew that it wasn't his fault, but his guts still wrenched constantly. "I didn't do it. They made me do it," Sven said as he felt his face grow hot. He lifted the small pile of ground charcoal to his nose and snorted it. His eyes streamed water as the dust burned his sinuses and back into his throat. Once the burning had subsided, that all-too-familiar sense of relief washed over his body, temporarily alleviating his pain. "I see that you've discovered your vice," a familiar female voice spoke. Sven sat up in panic, frantically searching the dim light to see if she had another one with her. But today, Siren hadn't brought a child with her. "I've seen stranger vices than snorting charcoal, but I must say, that is unfortunate." Sven's one good eye burned with an intense rage. His other eye had healed somewhat, but he could only see fuzzy shapes and shadows in it now. A burst of heat flowed out of his hands into the iron bars he was gripping. "Are we going to behave ourselves, or do I need to bring another one down?" Siren asked. Sven reflexively looked at the three burned bodies. Tears streamed down his soot-stained face as he remembered the screams, those tiny screams. Siren playfully twisted a silver coin between her fingers. "Don't look so glum. They wouldn't have lasted long on the streets anyway, and we needed you to gain control. Quickly. What makes you think that I'd ever help you?" Sven spat. Siren smiled. "The same reason that we all serve, revenge." A puzzled look crossed Sven's face. "Did you think that this kind of torture has been reserved just for you?" Siren asked. "That's who we are. You see, we've got plans for you, and you will have the chance to get vengeance on all those who have wronged you. But you need to live long enough to find out who that is." Sven didn't let any emotion onto his face, but he could feel a warm smouldering spread through stomach. He could feel the magic in him surging at her words, and knew that he wanted them all to suffer. "Now, let's try to work on your control," Siren said as she slid a knife across the coin she held in her hand. She flipped it into the cell, and it clinked as it hit the stone floor. Sven's muscles tightened, and adrenaline began forcing his heart to beat hard and fast. For the last few days, she would use her magic to hurt him, and then he had to stop the healing until she said he could. "Pick it up," she said in a soft voice that seemed to thunder in the cell. Sven reached a trembling hand down and snatched the coin. As he did, a hot flash flared pain in a line down his back. He screamed in pain and fell onto his hands and knees. "Control it," Siren hissed. I can't." Sven coughed as the wound on his back knit back together. He could feel energy drain out of him and found that he wanted to grind up some more charcoal. Another coin bounced, hitting him in the side before falling to the stone floor. "Pick it up." Sven could feel his stomach lurch, and he fought to keep its contents down as he slid his hand over the top of the coin. The same hot flash lanced down his back, and he crushed his teeth together so hard that he thought they might break. "Control it," Siren said coldly. Sven bit down hard, clenching his teeth as he felt the warm trickles of blood oozing from the wound. After a few seconds, he sucked in air hard and let the magic go, the cut knitting neatly back together a second later. A thin, silvery scar was all that remained, barely visible. His head suddenly felt light, as he was sure that he was going to pass out, and he was so hungry. "Better but not good enough," Siren said, tapping her knife against another coin. Sven crawled his whole body convulsing as he grabbed a small pile of ash and charcoal, inhaling it and coughing as the ash burned his sinus. He could feel a cooling sensation flow through his body, and the trembling subsided. Do you know why you need to control your healing power? Siren asked, cocking her head to the side. Sven shook his head, not trusting himself to speak. Saying the wrong thing often resulted in pain. Power, she said flatly. There is power in secrets. The fewer people that know of your healing ability, the longer you'll live, and let's just say that mages tend to have a problem living long lives. It's because the magic makes you go insane, Sven spat. Siren smiled, flipping a coin into the cell. Pick it up, she mused. Sven fought hard to not go for the coin, but he could feel the magic pulling him toward it. His fingers wrapped around the coin as he braced himself for pain, but nothing happened. He looked up and saw a devilish grin on Siren's face. She did that regularly, tossing him a coin that didn't do anything. Power corrupts the hearts of men, and magic is quite powerful, Siren said, tapping a new coin against her lips. But I don't think that it drives you insane. I've met mages who were good people. They just never lasted as long as those who embrace their new station. What do you want from me? Sven asked, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. Don't worry, Sven. We're going to make you powerful. In fact, you're going to help us reshape this continent, but we need to make you strong, she said, flicking another coin into the cell. Sven made no move toward it. Siren looked at him for a second, her eyes almost glowing. There are secrets that you'll learn. The power of liquid metal will allow us to have an unprecedented advantage over our so-called betters. She practically spat the last words. I don't understand what you want from me, Sven said, hands shaking as his eyes went to the small coin on his cell floor. Pick it up, Siren said, smiling. Sven's gaze fixed on the coin. Again, he could feel the magic calling out to him as he reached a trembling hand toward the coin. The last few days had done little to improve Achilles' mood. He'd managed to cut a few purses, but only enough coin to feed himself. He'd left a banana for Chauncey, who he hadn't seen since the night he'd tore up the place, but he hoped that his friend would come back soon. He stopped as he passed the Crystal Palace. Shrugging, he walked in and scanned the room before his eyes fell on Switch. He sat at a table to the side, surrounded by a few men who were playing cards. Mind if I sit? Achilles asked, sliding out a chair. Well, of course, friend, Switch said, flashing his trademark grin. What can I do for you? Achilles squirmed in his chair, not sure why he was even talking to a man like Switch. Last time we spoke, you said that you knew what it was like to fall on hard times, and well, Achilles stammered, you seem to find yourself in need of some friends that can help you out of a tight spot. Achilles nodded, clearing his throat self-consciously. Well, it just so happens that I'm in need of some help, and if there's one thing you need to know about me, it's that I take good care of my friends, Switch said as he waved over the waitress. 2 glasses were promptly set in front of both Switch and Achilles, filled with some kind of ale. Achilles took a sip, trying not to show how nervous he was. You sure he's up to it? One of the men asked as he laid his cards down, indicating that he folded that hand. One thing I know is that those who've fallen on hard times got a bit more edge to them. This one seems like he could make it just fine without us, but why not let a few friendly gents help a man out? Seems more boy than man. Another man snickered. Achilles' face reddened as he choked on his ale. Now don't you mind Slits over there, Switch said, producing a handkerchief. Achilles took it graciously, wiping his mouth and offering it back. No, you keep it, Switch said, taking a long dreg of his ale. Achilles starred as the handkerchief that was made of some kind of fine material. He tucked it away in a pocket before taking another sip of ale. What's your name, boy? Slits asked in a gruff, condescending tone. Achilles, he stammered. Well, Achilles, Switch said, smiling. I need someone to run this here sack over to Big Jimmy. You know where he is? Big Jimmy was a known loan shark in the Raft district. He had the reputation for breaking people's fingers with an old forging hammer. Rumour was that he'd killed his father, who was beating on him in a drunken rage. His father had been a mediocre blacksmith with a drinking problem. No one knew what really happened, except that Jimmy's dad wasn't running his shop anymore. And it was no longer a blacksmith shop. The law didn't pay much attention to the Raft district these days. Not really worth their trouble. "Is that all you want me to do?" Achilles asked hopefully. The men around the table all began to chuckle, including Switch. "Oh, no, son. You see you're joining my crew. That means you do what I ask, and I take good care of you. Plenty of drink, women, a fine bed to sleep in, and a little extra silver to line your pockets." Switch said the words, rolling off his tongue, as if he'd given this same speech 100 times. Achilles frowned. "And if I don't want to be part of anything?" "No hard feelings, son. You just finish your beer and we part as friends. But if you're looking to make something of yourself, then all you have to do is take that sack when you leave and make sure it gets to Jimmy. Then come back here for your first week's pay." "Just like that?" Achilles asked. "Just like that?" Switch smiled. Achilles looked around the table. The rest of them had mostly gone back to their game, having lost interest in the exchange. At that moment, Achilles felt his stomach grumble. "I can't cut purses for a living," he thought darkly. Finishing off his beer in a long gulp, he wiped the foam from his mouth and grabbed the sack. It was heavy, and he grunted with the exertion. He could already feel his legs start to burn and knew that time was not on his side. "Thank you kindly, friend," Switch called after him as he made his way out of the bar. Jimmy was more than a few streets over, but Achilles stopped and left the crowded streets for a chance to sit in an alley between two shops. The sack thudded hard to the ground as Achilles plopped next to it, rubbing his ankle. "What's in this thing?" he wondered, curiosity outweighing his fear. Looking around to make sure no one was watching him, he untied the sack and peered in. He felt his stomach sink and his hands went cold. Inside the bag was filled with silver bars. Achilles had never seen so much money. "I could live on this forever," he thought before realizing that he'd probably be dead within the first week of stealing it. Or kept alive to be made an example out of. He thought as flashes of potential tortures caused him to stand up, sinking the sack closed. Paranoia hit him like a wall of bricks. Suddenly, everyone looked like they were eyeing him. He started half jogging, half limping as fast as he could toward Jimmy's. Knocking on the door, he wiped the sweat pouring down his face with his new hanky. The door swung open, and a large bald man with scars scattered all over his arms opened the door and stared down at Achilles. His eyes moved from the boy to the sack, and he motioned for him to enter. Achilles darted into the shop and set the sack down in the center of the room. "This is from Switch," Achilles stammered. The big man only grunted and reached into his desk, pulling out a piece of paper. He snatched up the sack, pouring the bars onto the desk and counting them. Then he scribbled something on the paper and tucked it into an envelope, sealing it with wax. He handed the envelope back to Achilles, who took it nervously. "Get that to Switch, now," he said forcefully, smashing his fist on the table, causing all the bars to clink together in a loud clang. Achilles almost hopped out of the shop and made a mad dash through the crowded streets back to the Crystal Palace. His heart was running and his vision blurry when he smashed into someone in front of him, knocking both of them to the ground. "What the hell do you think you're doing, boy?" Tristan shouted as he got to his feet. "Are you that desperate to get whipped today?" Achilles stammered as he started to get up, but Tristan put a boot on his bad leg, and Achilles screamed out in pain. "Now, Trist," Clint started. "He didn't mean no harm. Let him up. You're hurting him." "I gotta make sure he didn't lift anything off me," Tristan said, letting his foot off Achilles' leg. "My letter!" Achilles shouted in panic. "Where's my letter?" Clint gave him an exasperated sigh, pointing a few feet behind the boy. Achilles scrambled over, clutching the letter tight in his fists and almost tripping as he got to his feet. "Now where do you think you're going?" Tristan said, after making sure none of his things were missing. Achilles bolted away, or more hobbled, as he tried to make it back to the Crystal Palace. "Ah, just let him go," Clint said, chuckling. "The boy's just trying to make a living. Did you see that limp he's got?" Tristan snorted. "If I catch him again, I'm going to whoop some manners in him. Even a cripple's got to respect decent folk." Clint gave Tristan a long look. "Decent?" he asked incredulously. "Don't start with me today, Clint. I'm in no mood." Tristan grumbled. Clint just laughed and slapped his friend on the back. "Don't worry. By the end of this week, we'll have some coin and a bit of fun. You need a night to just relax." "Only time I'm relaxed is when I'm shooting mages. Let's get this over with," Tristan said, stomping off in a huff. Clint sighed and trotted to catch up to his friend. Achilles burst into the Crystal Palace like a tornado, dust and all. The whole place went silent, and then he heard the distinct sound of triggers cocking. Achilles stopped dead in his tracks and raised his hands, slowly closing his eyes. The room went back to normal, with several tables chuckling at the boy. "Ah, you're back. Do you have something for me?" Switch said, flashing his white grin. Achilles opened his eyes and held out the letter in a shaking hand. Switch plucked it and quickly scanned it, smiling. "Looks like the entire contents of the bag made it there intact. Smart boy. If you'd tried to steal from me, then you wouldn't have enjoyed what I would have done." Achilles let out a long breath. "I wouldn't dream of stealing from you," he started, before Switch cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Oh, everyone dreams of taking what anyone else has. It's only the smart ones that know how to get away with it. But here, I prize myself on finding those that are smart enough not to try to cross me. Then I make them my friends," he said, motioning for Achilles to sit down at his table, which he did. Switch moved directly behind Achilles and placed his hands firmly onto his shoulders. Achilles flinched, but then Switch began to massage his shoulders and neck. Achilles stiffened, as he wasn't used to being touched. "Relax, my boy. I'm very pleased with you right now," he said, hesitating. "Although I find myself a little embarrassed. You see, I don't believe that I remember your name." Achilles cleared his throat as Switch moved back to the table, slouching down into the chair across from him. "It's Achilles." Switch put a finger to his lips, frowning. "Achilles. Achilles. Wait, you Hector's boy?" he asked questioningly. Achilles nodded, but didn't offer any more. Bad bit of luck with your parents." Achilles stiffened again at the mention of his parents. "Well, Achilles, I think that I can help you. Just think of me as an old uncle," Switch said, frowning. "Well, let's change that to young uncle," he said, nodding to himself. "Anyhow, I now have a vested interest in seeing you taken care of. I have the means to make that happen, but I've found that fear is a very poor motivator for loyalty. You see, I like to think of us as a family. Sure, we may fight or have our squabbles, but all in all, we look out for each other." Achilles looked around the table, noticing the other 4 men for the first time. Switch leaned forward and set a gold coin on the table in front of Achilles. It was a full gold crown. Achilles couldn't remember ever having held so much money. He could have a warm bed and hot meals for a month with that coin. Switch flicked something at Achilles, who grabbed it before it could hit him in the face. It was a copper mark, a relatively small amount next to the gold crown. "Good hands," Switch said, smiling. "That copper is payment for delivering my goods. You can take it and go, and we part as friendly acquaintances. Or," he said, sliding the gold crown closer to Achilles, "you can join our little family, and that is your first 1 week's pay." Achilles' eyes hungered after the coin. Weak? He said, raising an eyebrow. Switch nodded and flashed him that cool white grin. What do I have to do? Achilles asked. Anything I ask, without question. I do not approve of explaining myself to people. I expect you to follow my instructions without hesitation, and I don't ask twice. Achilles may have been young, but he was no fool. This offer was no offer at all. If he refused, the next time he woke up would be in the afterlife. He already knew too much. How did I get myself mixed up in this? He thought frantically. Then another thought occurred to him. With that kind of coin, eventually, I'd be able to get a gun. He thought as he fought to suppress a grin. In a smooth motion, he reached out, pocketing the coin. All right, Uncle Switch, what do you need me to do? The rest of the men at the table chuckled, including Switch. Uncle Switch, he said, musing to himself. You know, coming from you, I kinda like that, he said, flashing his too white grin. Artie! Artie! Ramza shouted excitedly as he was running up to camp. Artemis whirled around, pointing her gun at him, a look of panic on her face. Ramza skidded to a stop, seeing her rifle pointed right at him. You okay, Artie? Ramza asked. It's just me. Artemis shouldered her rifle, putting her hand on her hip. Ramza, I thought you knew better than to sneak up on a girl. Ramza scratched his head in confusion. Is everything good? He asked hesitantly. I'm fine, she said, turning and sitting back down. It's just that you don't seem yourself lately. You're so agitated at something. Did Clint make another pass at you? He asked incredulously. Artemis laughed, setting her rifle leaning next to her. That man is a rogue on his best day, but my honor remains intact, she said, patting the seat next to her. The big man plopped down with such force that Artemis was almost knocked off her seat. Look what I found, he said, holding out his hands, showing a small hurt parrot. She looked and frowned. Not another sick animal. You know that you get too attached and bawl like a baby when they're finally well enough to leave. I do not, Ramza huffed. Artemis leveled her gaze at him. Well, I can't help it. They need me, he said, rising to his feet. In my homeland, it's okay for a warrior to have a sensitive side. Just 'cause I care doesn't mean I can't crack a few skulls too. Artemis stood up and put her hand on Ramza's back. It's okay, darling. I think it's sweet. Ramza puffed up a bit at that and carefully placed the bird in a cage he had in his wagon. She could see that it already had seeds and water it in. She shook her head, wondering if Ramza kept it ready just in case. Anyway, I spoke to Clint. He says he's got a job for us. Really? Artemis said, perking up. Yay. You know those new steam engines that they got coming in and out of town? Yay, Artemis said, nodding hesitantly. Well, you see, I think we're going to rob it, Ramza said, fidgeting. Artemis scowled at him. You know how hard those things are to rob? They're like mini fortresses that can move as fast as a horse. She huffed. Yay, but Clint said it'd be easy, Ramza said, frowning. Oh, sure, if Clint said it, then it must be true, because he's always right, Artemis said sarcastically. Glad to see that you're finally warming up to the truth of things, Clint said, emerging from the brush with Tristan. How long have you been standing there? Artemis asked, annoyed. Long enough, Clint said, winking. We just got here, Tristan said, plopping down on a seat. Are you actually serious about robbing a train? Artemis asked incredulously. Darling, I'm never serious, Clint said, smiling. But I am going to rob that train. You know that we're supposed to be well, you know, Ramza said, running his fingers through his beard. Use your words, big guy, Clint said, chiding the big man. Good guys, Ramza huffed. We don't rob innocent people. No such thing as good guys, Tristan said mockingly. You know that's not true. Artemis said defensively. Now, don't worry, my furry friend, Clint said to Ramza. We may not be good guys, but we ain't gonna rob any innocent or needy folk. That's not our way. Besides, we got a reputation to live up to, and people may not label us heroes, but no one can doubt that we are rather dashing. Artemis rolled her eyes, and Ramza puffed up a bit. I like being dashing, he said, grinning. But scamming brutes who deserve it is one thing. I don't know how I feel about robbing people just 'cause they're rich. Ramza, Clint scolded. I thought you had more faith in me than that. Clint said, smiling, as he produced a thick envelope from his inner coat pocket. What's that supposed to mean? Artemis said, in a cool tone. This, Clint said, is the plans and schematics of a luxury steam engine that will be departing from our very own Silver City in 2 days, and it just so happens to be loaded with a mess of silver bars that certain men of questionable nature. Who aren't dashing? Ramza blurted out, interrupting Clint and puffing out his chest. Right. Like I was saying, these men who aren't dashing like us are trying to smuggle them out of the city, Clint finished. And we're just supposed to raid a metal fortress that's packed to the brim with guards and blazing down a metal track at unheard of speeds like it's no trouble at all, Artemis said incredulously. Oh, it's worse than you think, Tristan said darkly. All the eyes of the group fell on the surly man. Every passenger, employee, and guard is assigned a numbered ticket. That number is part of a master list that has your description on it, as well as a description of your luggage, including weight. They would infringe on a lady's privacy by weighing her luggage, Artemis scoffed. Not just your luggage, which they're also going to go through, but they weigh each passenger to make sure that they don't try to leave with anyone else's belongings, Tristan said. Ramza scratched his head, looking confused. So, how are we going to pull this off? More importantly, why are we doing this? Are you that hard up for cash? Artemis asked condescendingly. Now hold on a minute. Can I please explain? Clint asked. The group turned toward him, and Ramza started wringing his hands with nervous excitement. He always loved Clint's elaborate scams. That's why I'm going to need your guys' help getting on the train. Then I can lift the bars and leave without raising any alarms. Ramza scratched head, looking confused. Won't the train be moving? Now you're getting it, Clint said. And I'm going to need you to start a fight so Artie can lift the keys to the back freight cars. Then Tristan and I will take down the guards and bam. I escape with the silver and haul it back to meet you guys. You won't have any contraband, and thus will just walk off with everyone else. Clint nabbed an apple and took a satisfying bite. He chewed it with a smug look on his face when Tristan broke in. That's it? Tristan said, exasperated. That's not a plan. That's like saying our plan for robbing a bank is to walk in and rob it. By Ceres beard, man, what are you thinking? Clint stiffed his nose up and swallowed his apple bite. I'll admit that all the kinks haven't been worked out, but... All the kinks, Artemis said, throwing her hands up. Tristan's right. That plan is no plan at all. What makes you think that we'd even agree to this? Well, I have always wanted to ride a train, Ramza said, shrugging. You see, half of us are already on board, and the other half know that I can pull this off, so where's the problem? Clint asked. Both Tristan and Artemis just stared, one wide-eyed, one mouth open. I'll take those looks as a yes. Now we've only got 2 days to make this happen, so things are going to move fast, Clint said, taking another bite out of the